I welcome you all for this today's 12th master video session. It has been almost 3 months since we have meeting on this digital platform, but I hope we can meet very soon physically as the authority permits. Uh, to continue this master video session, today we have invited a very well-known faculty in nuclear medicine, that is Dr. Solo sir. He is going to enlighten us on surgical aspects of nuclear medicine. I request our secretary, Dr. Basavaraj, to start the proceedings.
Thank
Over
you,
to
sir.
you.
Welcome everyone to 12th master video session from Kolhapur Surgical Society, which we are conducting every Saturday between 8 to 9 p.m. Today we have invited Dr. Solo sir, who's an eminent nuclear medicine person in this region. I welcome Dr. Solo sir for today's session. Welcome Dr. Kassa sir, President of Kolhapur Surgical Society. Dr. Varute sir. Today's MMC observer, Dr. Chaugle sir. Welcome Sharad Desai sir. And I also welcome moderators, Dr. Kaustubh Kulkarni. As this session is MMC accredited, I request the delegates to fill up the form, which will be in the form of Google link chat box very soon. To introduce Dr. Shrikant Solo sir, sir is MD Medicine from Bhopal University. He is DRM Nuclear Medicine from Mumbai University. He is Fellowship of Asian National Nuclear Medicine Board. He is practicing as a consultant in nuclear medicine at Pune for last 25 years. Sir has worked in nuclear cardiology at Jaslok Hospital, Mumbai. He has a key role in doing a radiation synovectomy with Professor Moder in Cologne, Germany. He has published more than 40 articles in various journals. He has established a private clinic dedicated to nuclear medicine in Pune in 2001 called Spec Lab. And Sir is pioneer in PET-CT in Pune since 2007. So welcome, sir, and over to you for today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Your kind introduction, Dr. Vijay, Dr. Varute, Dr. Desai, all eminent, surgical practitioners in Kolhapur. It's a privilege indeed to be able to make a presentation before you all. Yes, I'll now share my screen. All right, so I hope this is visible.
Yes, sir.
All right, so, typically when I started practice, actually I started the work of nuclear medicine as an employee in Ruby Hall in 1995. And I used to be in awe of, my senior colleagues from the from other specialties, principal clinical specialties like cardiology, nephrology. What I used to be enamored about was the, suppose we were to make a presentation collectively in a platform. So I used to wonder how, they used to gather cases which were done in the previous 48 hours. In this week, whatever they are, I used to wonder how much of data these people have. And I used to really envy that, quality in them. And I'll come to that later. So today it's not going to be a typical classroom, presentation where you start with what is the role of nuclear medicine, what are the equipments involved, what's, the isotope use. I'll come to that only superficially when it comes to respective cases. So I'm going to talk and highlight about the practical aspects that a surgeon faces. What is key message to be delivered in a given clinical situation. For instance, in this patient, he had a neck swelling and imaging findings suggested a parotid mass. They excised it, thinking it to be parotid mass, and it turned out to be poorly differentiated squamous cell carcinoma. Because it was squamous cell carcinoma, they thought that there must be some occult primary which was probably missed, although a laryngoscopy was done and a gyroscopy was done. And so there you are. This is so typically an area because when you insert the scope, you go posterior to the epiglottis. So there are two aspects of epiglottis: the lingual aspect and the oropharyngeal, the laryngeal aspect. So this one, the valvular lesion, is one area in head and neck pathology which is likely to be missed on imaging. The other area which could be missed is the palatine tonsil because there are crypts which can hide the occult malignancy. The fossa of Rosenmüller, you all know, is another site. So here you can see the scope goes straight down like this, and we miss the valvular region. This is, of course, the lingual aspect of the epiglottis, which was where the malignancy was hidden and subsequently proven. And what was initially considered to be parotid mass actually here was actually a large lymph node. You can see a post-operative collection that's there. Another important aspect is clinical examination. For instance, in this report, it says that there is a lot of artifact because of the dental, what does it speak? Dental implants are noted obscuring the details of oral cavity and the oral tongue. Region of the oral tongue hence cannot be definitely commented upon. So this is a practical difficulty. However,
Can I interrupt?
yeah.
You can use a full screen. You do it as a full screen.
Thank you. All right. So is that better?
Yeah.
All right. So
Yeah.
So as you can see here, because of the little dental implants, but as a radiologist or as an imaging specialist, one has to, especially when it comes to head and neck, it's extremely important to be in link with the clinical examination, because unless you have done the clinical examination of the tongue or the oral mucosa, you are likely to miss or overinterpret lesions. So for instance, in this, there was a clear-cut ulcer clinically visible. And on FDG PET scan on the protruding tongue, you can see it's very well seen. That's a necrotic node level 2 here. So importance of examination even for the imaging specialist is being stressed here. The other view is, of course, you do a coronal section and you can see here red hot FDG uptake in the tongue, in the middle third of the tongue. So when you have malignancy which is in the post-cricoid hypopharynx, it's important for the radiation oncologist and of course also for the surgeon to know which wall of the laryngopharynx is involved. Whether we are dealing with involvement of the post-cricoid hypopharynx, whether we are dealing with involvement of the posterior pharyngeal wall or laryngopharyngeal wall, are we dealing with that? So one way which we have adopted a quick and a very simple method is we give water to the patient to swallow, and it's a 5 or 10 second per swallowing scan that we adopt. So look at this. Here the laryngopharynx is the hypopharynx is so well opened up. You can see here the posterior pharyngeal, the post-cricoid hypopharynx is relatively clean. The posterior pharyngeal wall shows up the localization of FDG. So this is a posterior pharyngeal wall, hypopharyngeal wall malignancy, very beautifully separated out from the post-cricoid hypopharynx by a simple maneuver, that is per swallowing. Yet another view. This is the normal image, and that's per swallowing image. Physiologic uptake in the stomach, in a non-distended stomach, can give rise to false positive results. So to overcome this pathology, this physiologic variation, you have to distend the stomach to avoid false positive results. And you can see here a distended stomach image. The activity in the stomach wall is completely vanished. When it comes to imaging of the prostate gland, another maneuver, just to you are not dealing with physiologic urinary excretion, is, and this is well described in the books, is to do a PSMA scan image within 5 minutes of administration of isotope. Because after 5 to 7 minutes, the isotope starts trickling in the urinary bladder, and then you have no, this is urinary bladder, and you have no way of knowing whether this is, you're dealing with physiologic uptake or is it pathological involvement. So here you can see the early image shows uptake. There's nothing in the urinary bladder, but the delayed in the conventional image which is required at 60 minutes, you're not sure this is urinary bladder and this could be this. You're not sure, but here you are sure that this is not coming from the urinary bladder. This is prostatic abnormality infiltrating the wall of the rectum and the bladder. So here is an example of a patient who had undergone a plasty in the past, and there was a superficial femoral artery thrombosis, and they thought that the patient could be having port spine, because you can see here port spine because there was backache. And on our scan, you can see that there's a big hypermetabolic lesion in the right lung upper lobe, and there were smaller nodules elsewhere. So a patient who presents with deep venous thrombosis, obviously you have to think in terms of occult malignancy, and that's what this patient had. So here is how you handle incidental lesions. So for instance, this patient had mass in the neck, which was pretty big, about 5 centimeters, and for the disease, FNEC was positive. And here was the piriform sinus lesion seen on PET scan. You see here, piriform sinus lesion. And incidentally, this patient had on whole body scan abnormal uptake in the ascending colon. So this was a synchronous pathology. Now one has to be wary that when you have a lesion which is away from the site of primary presentation, the second hypermetabolic area which we see on PET scan need not always be malignant. We have come across tuberculous involvement in such situations. So there is no way but to do a biopsy from such a second site to establish a diagnosis, because it's not specific for malignancy, as you know. So here is another masquerading. This patient had psychiatric problems, and she wasn't able to walk. And when they did a plain X-ray, they thought that this was pathological fracture, and they were suspecting malignancy. So we did a PET scan, of course, because the patient was initially thought to be having, and you have to be having pathological fracture. You can see generally the vertebrae are osteoporotic. They have some degree of osteopenia. This is hot in the region of fracture site. But look at this. There is fracture over here. And the pelvic bones, look at this, significant amount of osteopenia. And there was no occult lesion anywhere else, in the breast, in the lungs. So we said that extensive weakly metabolic osteolytic lesions, this is not typical of myeloma, because myeloma spots are much hotter on PET scan. So we decided that you must get a calcium, PTH, Vesta-BP parathyroid scan to rule out metabolic cause. And that's what was done. You can see here, this is a technetium scan which localizes in the thyroid gland. This is what is called as either a thallium or a systemic scan, which localizes in thyroid as well as parathyroid. So you inject one isotope, without moving the patient, you inject another isotope, subtract the two images, what you get is a parathyroid adenoma. So this was, and this is a SPECT CT. So you also subject the patient to CT scan, and you can see here, this was the left inferior parathyroid adenoma, where SPECT CT. And of course, the patient had another one on the right side. So there were two lesions actually. There were two lesions. This was one, and this is the second one. So that's why she had such extensive osteopenia. Masquerading. We are talking about how clinical picture can masquerade, or hide the primary pathology. We already dealt with parathyroidism. This is another interesting case. Patient had loose motions. They thought this was a primary colonic pathology. The patient had in the past undergone resection of a segment of transverse colon. You can see here anastomosis. So the local pathology they thought, and they rejected it, thinking it to be Crohn's disease, and the diarrhea persisted till such time that the patient visited a gastroenterologist, and the gastroenterologist said this is probably a secretory diarrhea and not a local cause of diarrhea. And he said, this is a secretory diarrhea, get a somatostatin receptor PET scan. Because when you're suspecting neuroendocrine tumors, fluorodeoxyglucose, which is a conventional PET scan agent, is really not of much value because most of these lesions are slowly proliferating and do not imbibe much of glucose. So they turn out to be falsely negative on a FDG PET scan. So he was sort of aware of this, that you should do somatostatin receptor PET scan. Colonoscopy is normal subsequently, and that's the pathology. This is a whole body somatostatin. You can see the brain is not seen. That's typical of somatostatin receptor, also called as a DOTA scan. That's kidneys, bladder. That's abnormal, and that corresponds to this nodule. So this was a pulmonary carcinoid picked up on a somatostatin. Patient presented with, we can see here, and this is one of our papers which was published recently, actually 2018, Scientific of Functional Neuroendocrine Tumors and its review of literature. So these are various, this is pheochromocytoma, that's also pheochromocytoma. This was bilateral pheochromocytoma, gastric carcinoid, etc., etc. So these are various lesions, insulinomas. This is insulinoma. See here. This was present. So this girl or lady, young lady, had undergone splenectomy for spherocytosis in 2008. So when she was pretty young. And recently the patient had pain in abdomen. Ultrasound showed some masses. So the surgeon was pretty aware that she had hematologic disorder, and he was concerned that probably we are dealing with recurrence of splenosis. So he asked me whether we can do anything. So the functional scan which you can do is an isotope which goes to the spleen and liver, is called as a colloid liver scan. So a colloid liver scan was done. That's the uptake in the liver, but here that tissue, subhepatic region, shows uptake, and there were some additional areas here in the left hypochondrium which were also. So there were multiple splenosis which were defined on colloid liver scan. This was also published as a case report in your journal, actually, Indian Journal of Surgery. This was published in 2000, and what it was. So this is interesting. A patient, young patient, history of right nephrectomy, and it was clear cell carcinoma. Tumor was pretty big, and there was no lymphovascular embolization, and there was no perineural invasion. And ultrasound done subsequently in 2017. This was in England, and they said that there are multiple liver lesions up to 22 mm. And this is the report from ultrasound overseas. So they said that there are liver lesions. They may represent, given the history of carcinoma, further investigation is recommended. So when you have history of nephrectomy or the mass is pretty big, which you are not sure of both hemangioma and I've said this in past meetings, this is FDG PET scan. You can see here, but it's completely cold. It's not showing any area of hypermetabolism. So it's unlike gastric. So to confirm that this is a hemangioma, we did what is called an RBC blood pool scan. And can you see that? Well localized focal intense concentration of blood pooling within that hypodense liver lesion, typical of hepatic cavernous hemangioma. Another interesting, these are where I'm narrating all those cases where clinically the presentation was a bit deceptive, or radiologically the presentation was such that you're not sure which way we are heading. So here is a child who had abdominal pain. Look at the ultrasound. Possibility of appendicular lump. Possibility of a perforation as well. Look at that. But the pediatrician was pretty confident. He said, I think this is Meckel's diverticulum. So he asked for a Meckel scan, a simple test using technetium per technicate. It localizes normally physiologically in the gastric mucosa, that's in the urinary bladder, and that's ectopic gastric mucosa in the Meckel's diverticulum, and that's the peroperative image. Thanks to the surgeon who readily, pediatric surgeon who readily shared this. This is another young patient who had video colonoscopy because of black stool, and the video colonoscopy was normal, except that there was black stool coming in from the terminal ileum. So they were suspecting. So when you have a child with bleeding per rectum, there are two options. One is to do a RBC blood pool scan to know whether the child is still bleeding or if the bleeding has arrested. And the second is, of course, to do a Meckel scan to know whether this is Meckel's. So ordinarily, if you do a RBC scan, it extends for about 24 hours, and because you saturate the gastric thing with perchlorate, you can't perform the Meckel scan immediately after that. So you need to wait for a few days. So instead, I normally recommend that we do a Meckel scan first. If it turns out to be negative, next day you can call the patient for the RBC blood pool scan to look for ongoing bleeding. So the difference between the previous scan and this scan is the previous scan showed a focal hotspot near the urinary bladder that was typical of Meckel's. That's book description. This one is in the subhepatic region and it's rather elongated. You can see here, intense uptake. This is not physiologic, that's stomach. This is bowel loops, but this is persistent in the same subhepatic region, intense uptake. So this is a typical site of duodenal duplication cyst, which also harbors ectopic gastric mucosa, and that's what was proven on peroperative, and that's the histology. So here is a patient who presented with abnormal behavior, and CT scan showed lesion which was 15 millimeter question mark insulinoma, and the abnormal behavior was considered to be because of repeated episodes of hypoglycemia. So there are two isotopes which are ordinarily used to pick up neuroendocrine tumors, that includes insulinoma. One is somatostatin receptor PET scan, and the second is GLP-1 receptor, glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor PET scan. Now you'll ask me, why not directly go to GLP-1? It's like in a patient who has chest pain, you don't jump to do an angiogram. You first do an ECG, then you do a stress test, then you do an echocardiogram, and then you consider doing an angiogram or thallium in between. So similarly, you don't jump to, you have to go orderly. So that's why a somatostatin receptor PET scan is the first test of choice. And unfortunately, in this patient, that's pancreas, that's the stomach, nothing seen, nothing focal to suggest any abnormal somatostatin receptor activity. Here, various sections. And then because these values were high, the proinsulin and C-peptide, so we said we'll do a GLP-1 receptor PET scan and look at that. Intense in the body of pancreas, this was typical of insulinoma. And that was postoperative histopathology. Here is another important reason why PET scan needs a closer look in your day-to-day practice. A patient had growth on in the descending colon on colonoscopy. Actually, the patient had growth in the rectum to begin with. They could not do information of the what's going on, because they could not negotiate about the ascending colon. And you can see here there are two hot areas rather. So that's the heart, and that's the descending colon mass. Rectum, this and this, and both of them turned out to be malignant. So this is the importance of detecting synchronous primary neoplasm by using the PET scan. Now, this is a very important question which always intrigues me. What is the importance of doing a surveillance scan? People come and ask me, Doctor, PET scan is zarur. So I normally tell them it's the clinician who decides whether it's required or not. And unless you have clinicians referring note, we resist in doing it, unless it's a very obvious, indication where the consultant surgeon has already called us and informed us the reason. Here is a patient who had surgery for gallbladder malignancy, and there was some focal fatty infiltration of CT scan. Patient was otherwise quite asymptomatic and fine. The GV lesion was cold. There was just a granuloma here, operative. There was nothing at all. Look at that. This is the inner quadrant breast hotspot, which was detected on a PET scan and which was a synchronous and metachronous. The patient had been treated earlier, and now the patient comes, and this is the second malignancy which was picked up on PET scan. Another important reason, how often you need to do it. I mean, I have no answer to this. Actually, I really whether it is really surveillance is really required or not. For instance, in this patient in 2016, post chemo doing well, 2017 PET scan is rock normal, nothing at all. You can see it's a clean scan. 2000, I'm sorry, this is 17. Patient is totally asymptomatic, absolutely nothing. 1 year down the line, a surveillance scan. No weight loss, no loss of appetite, no complaints whatsoever, believe me. And look at that. Node here, liver mass here. It is so frustrating, you know. This is skeletal mets. It is, and you know, then we go on looking into the previous scan whether we missed something on. It's really, it was rock normal. And so that's the tragedy of, you know, cancer. So here is a very interesting case actually, and I'm sharing this because it's an extremely important practical tip. And this case also was published as a case report. So here is a patient who had transplantation. Post-transplantation, the patient developed mild hydronephrosis. So we did a renal scan. You can see here, good uptake of radiotracer in the transplant kidney. But there is progressive accumulation without much of excretion. This is where we terminated the scan. So this is false. So here, so we said that this is likely to be, look at this, in the post-void as well as delayed, there is significant retention in the renal pelvic callaceous system. And the native kidneys were of course malfunctioning. So the patient underwent surgery. What kind of surgery? Ureterostomy. So the native ureter of the native right ureter was anastomosed to the transplant right ureter. And subsequently, the patient, in I think about 2 to 3 weeks time, started developing fever. Blood culture was sterile, and they isolated some organisms from the DJ stain. So they thought that this could be infection in the transplant kidney. So they asked us to do a PET scan. This is a PET scan. You can see whatever you see here in the region of medulla is all in the collecting system. The cortex itself doesn't show much of focal uptake to suggest focus of pyelonephritis. So look at this. This is a whole body PET scan. The transplant kidney, the bone marrow because of too much of toxemia. But look at that hotspot. Can you appreciate that? There's a hotspot here. That's the native kidney. So what about the native kidney? The left native kidney is fine. It doesn't show any hotspot. But the right native kidney shows a hotspot. These are two areas which are showing here. So we said this is a focus of pyelonephritis involving the native kidney, and the reason is obviously ureterostomy accounting for reflux. Now you may ask me, what is the proof that the patient has reflux on that side, unilateral side? And the proof is here. This is pre-contrast. These are non-functioning kidneys. These are native non-functioning kidneys. Delayed image shows contrast in this kidney. There is no contrast in this kidney. This is all reflux related. Can you appreciate that? From the transplant to the native kidney. So then, of course, this was a pickup of pyelonephritis, and it was effectively treated with a prolonged course of antibiotics that was published in the Asia Oceania Conference of Journal of Nuclear Medicine. So here is a patient. The value of PSA, typical textbook teaching is when the PSA is 100, you do a bone scan. 80% of the times it's going to be positive. When the PSA is less than 10, you can avoid metastatic workup. It has all been proven wrong. PSMA scan was introduced in the year 2012, I think. And now we've done hundreds of these cases. And I can tell you, PSA cannot serum PSA cannot predict if a patient has lymph node metastasis, if a patient has skeletal metastasis. It has no correlation, and I do not know what is actual factor responsible for this. 62-year-old PSA is 16, biopsy is adenocarcinoma. Don't expect metastasis, obviously, but here, that's the prostatic peripheral zone lesion, extra prostatic extension, lymph nodes in the pelvis. You can see those. You can see this vertebral metastasis, retroperitoneal nodes, pelvic zone metastasis, vertebral metastasis. PSA of 16. Can you believe that? Rib metastasis. So, is PSA the final word in carcinoma of prostate? Nothing is final. Nothing is foolproof in medicine. We all learn from our humble experience dealing with patients, and so have I. And for instance, in dealing with this patient, suspected to be CA prostate. I don't remember PSA, but I think it was borderline high, about 8 to 10. And the PSMA scan failed me. You can see it. It's just inhomogeneous uptake. I am not sure. This could be, of course, PSMA PET scan, they say, is primarily meant for metastatic workup. It is not a diagnostic tool. But if you get a good uptake in the prostate gland on PSMA, you can be confident that this is likely to be malignant. In this odd case where PSMA was inconclusive, we decided to do what is called as this is a new molecule. It's labeled with gallium-68. It's called as fibrinogen activation protein inhibitor. This is a new molecule which we used in this patient, and you can see here the peripheral zone shows intense uptake typical of malignancy. So here is a patient with an example of a false negative prostate biopsy. Now, can that happen in a PSA with 100, 109, as seen here? Trus biopsy, fibromuscular hyperplasia, that's about it. PSMA PET scan, you can see here, intense uptake in the right lobe, spilling over to the left lobe. This is a typical example of a false negative biopsy. The biopsy has to be repeated. That's what we said. It did turn out to be. FDG PET, we use it as a important tool for looking for recurrence. But the problem with FDG is it is notorious for localizing in colon physiological. So here is a patient who had been operated for right hemicolectomy. The patient had R0 nodes were negative, the margins were clear, everything was absolutely perfectly done. Absolutely nothing could go wrong. There was a recent weight loss, and with COVID, you can have weight loss in these patients. So you can see that was the pathology, and we did this was last week actually, a couple of days back. You can see here uptake at the anastomotic site of FDG. So I was intrigued whether we are dealing with physiologic variation or what. So we did what is called as a FAPI scan here, and you can see I was thrilled with this scan. That FAPI is totally normal, and FAPI is extremely good tool to pick up malignancy. So I was now confident that this is physiologic, and FAPI scan has ruled out recurrence in this thing. Rest of the PET scan, of course, was normal. Here is an example of a pathological fracture of humerus, thought to be probably because of this lung mass, although looking at the X-ray, it is such a well circumscribed mass, probably likely to be benign, except of course in carcinoid you can have this well-defined one. So anyway, they asked for a PET scan, and you can see that mass is totally cold on our scan. So it's unlikely to be the primary. So where is the culprit? The FDG PET scan failed me once again, because signet ring cell carcinomas and mucin-rich carcinomas both are poorly metabolic. They do not show intense metabolic activity on FDG PET scan. So once again, coming to our rescue was FAPI. So look at this. This is the FAPI scan, and look at this. This is FDG PET scan. FDG, you can look at if you compare it with liver, it's almost less than liver. Look at this as compared. Normally it doesn't go here, but you can see intense uptake in the gastric anterum and pylorus. So this was hidden malignancy, and I must thank the surgeon, because look at this. This is the anteropylorus. scored on FDG scan and on FAPI scan. So remember that we have a new tool now. So on FAPI, it is signet ring cell carcinomas, mucin-rich carcinomas. Think of FAPI scan and not FDG PET scan. As of now, what we are doing is we're doing FDG scan and we're doing adding up with the complementary FAPI scan to make sure that we don't miss the diagnosis. And this is the follow-up. This is the patient underwent gastrectomy. It was signet ring cell carcinoma, and that's the histopathology. So, having shared with you all these, the purpose of, you must have noticed that I've intensely, passionately followed up these patients for either histology, to test the histology. This I received today, all histopathology, and the reason is, unless we have intense interdisciplinary communication, unless we understand each other's limitations and benefits, I do not consider myself going any wiser or having contributed to patient management. So this is a typical work list of mine of a follow-up. And believe me that of the list of follow-up cases which I keep for every given month, if I have 20 cases, less than 10% of these cases actually land up with a fruitful follow-up result, or maybe 25% of cases. So it's important to have follow-up of these cases. Unless we have that, we don't become any wiser, and it doesn't help. The knowledge doesn't help, serve the patient better. So to conclude the last two slides, both the optimist and pessimist contribute to society. The optimist invents the aeroplane, the pessimist the parachute. Such words of wisdom. I've just concluded writing a memoir of the last 20 years of private practice, and it's called The Last Man in the Queue, the most unwanted member of the society, where who finds himself so helpless, running a private practice. So there are some Hindi poems, because you see, I did my MBBS Hindi from Bhopal, so I have intense, liking for Hindi. So you can see here, these are two poems, titles of two poems. काश तू अनपढ़ होती आई, मैं भी ना करता ये पढ़ाई. खेत में रहते हम सब मिलकर, कंगाली का जश्न मनाकर, और तो वही गीत गाती, धिनकर 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 धिनकर. गोबर की जब खुशबू आई, मेरी तो दुनिया महकाई. हाय वो तेरे हाथ की लिपाई, मैं भागा आता आई आई. काश तू अनपढ़ होती आई, मैं भी ना करता ये पढ़ाई. It's a satire which sort of rebukes the current education system, which only runs after grabbing marks and grabbing jobs, rather than promoting self-reliance, as we all do. Thank you very much for your time, Dr. Murite. You asked me to stick within 35 minutes. I've done that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. That was an excellent presentation. Am I audible?
Excellent presentation. Very nice. Very nice. And the end was much more excellent.
Sir, there is a question from Dr. Deepak Patel, sir, that what percentage of patients with ectopic gastric mucosa in Meckel's diverticulum you see in your experience, sir?
What percentage of
ectopic gastric mucosa in Meckel's diverticulum?
Unless Meckel's diverticulum has ectopic gastric mucosa, the test will never be positive. It's 100%. If the Meckel's scan is positive, it is. If Meckel's scan is negative, it means that it does not harbor ectopic gastric mucosa. It could be harboring pancreatic mucosa. It could be harboring colonic mucosa. It could be, but not again. But it localizes in the Meckel's diverticulum by virtue of ectopic gastric mucosa. And if it is negative, it's to be considered as false negative because it doesn't harbor. Isotope will not reach the Meckel's diverticulum otherwise.
Okay. So one small doubt for everyone's benefit. generally we know that inflammatory lesions can give a false positive result, and we generally measure the uptake in SUV. So is there any cutoff particularly for this SUV to differentiate between inflammatory and malignant?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Basavaraj, for this question. The standardized uptake value essentially is calculated based on the intensity of isotope localization in that particular organ of interest or region of interest, corrected to the patient's body mass, weight, etc., etc. It has no diagnostic value. It has only got prognostic value. So you may have, I've shown you signet ring cell carcinoma where the SUV will be 1.5 in FDG scan, and in FAPI it will be 5.4. I have seen tuberculosis with an SUV of 25. So in situations where the SUV is more than 5 or 10 or 25, whatever it is, the objective is how well the treatment response. So it's primarily for prognostication. You have done it at one point in time, and when having received treatment, either anti-tubercular or cancer treatment, when the patient comes for a follow-up, if the value falls down as compared to the previous scan by 30% or more, you know that the treatment is effective. So it has prognostic value. It has no diagnostic.
Thank you, sir. Again, sir, as we have like PG students also in our audience, could you tell us like what all areas are there where the PET scan wouldn't pick up the metastasis, like
Yes.
possibly brain, or what are the limitations basically?
Well, there is as far as the brain is concerned, there is intense physiologic uptake of fluorodeoxyglucose. That's the molecule which we commonly use, which will mask a small weakly metabolic lesion. So as a matter of fact, FDG PET scan conventionally is done from eyes to thighs, which means the brain is cut off. The brain is not as a part of him. We do it conventionally because it's, we don't want to miss anything in the skull bones. But we put a in that physiologic uptake in brain precludes evaluation of cerebral lesions. So if you are suspecting anything in the brain, you have to do an MRI. So that's one. Slow proliferating tumors. So I said signet ring cell carcinomas, mucin-rich carcinomas, and slow proliferating tumors include neuroendocrine tumors, carcinoma of prostate, bronchial carcinoma. These FDG PET. So which is mucin-rich or serous papillary adenocarcinoma. Here, I would insist to use two separate molecules. One is for prostate. I told you about prostate-specific membrane antigen. For signet ring cell carcinoma and mucin-rich neoplasms, you should use FAPI. Now you know that these are two molecules which have. For neuroendocrine tumors, you must use somatostatin receptor. So these are how you dissect out based on. Sometimes it's a challenging situation. Many times, carcinoma of prostate invades the rectum, and you land up with an ulcer in the rectum, and eventually you realize that it's actually prostate, and you do a PET scan. It turns out to be good. Add up to doing a PSMA scan and prove that this is prostate.
Also, sir, could you just comment on the therapeutic usage of nuclear medicine?
Oh yeah, sure. I was told by Dr. Pratap that I should restrict my talk to 35 minutes. So I said I'll not overload you people. But castration-resistant carcinoma of prostate, where you have exhausted all possible sorts of treatment. See, patient has extensive skeletal symptoms, extensive metastasis, patient has liver metastasis, lung nodules. You don't know what else to do, what further to do. We have now what is called as peptide receptor radionuclide therapy. Peptide receptor radionuclide therapy involves administration of a molecule emits beta radiation or alpha radiation, which is tagged with a peptide or a ligand, which has avidity for the tumor. For instance, PSMA is a peptide. The diagnostic molecule is gallium-68, but the therapeutic molecule is called as lutetium-177. So lutetium is the beta emitting molecule, which can be labeled tagged with PSMA and administered intravenously. It will go and sit in the metastatic deposits. It will ablate those or bombard those metastatic deposits with beta radiation and provide significant symptomatic relief to the patient. So quality of life definitely improves remarkably in these patients. Objective evidence is seen over a period of 3 to 4 months. The cycles are there are about 4 cycles to be administered every 6 to 8 weeks. So about every 2 months you administer one cycle. The cost is about a lakh of rupees every cycle. And luckily for prostate specific membrane antigen therapy with PRRT, you don't need to look into the renal function. But when it comes to metastatic neuroendocrine tumors, the renal functions have to be sufficient. Otherwise, the patient risks, you risk the patient into pushing into renal insufficiency. So if a patient has renal insufficiency, you should, GFR is less than 30 ml, you don't choose these patients. If the blood parameters such as hemoglobin, WBC are not adequate, then you have to refrain because that can further aggravate bone marrow suppression. Actinium is prohibitively expensive, but it is far superior as far as objective test results is concerned. The cost ranges in the about 5 to 6 lakh of rupees per cycle, and it's regularly being done in Jastok Hospital, Mumbai. It's regularly being done in Fortis in Delhi because patients can afford. For us, we have to depend upon lutetium, which is supplied by the BRC, and the cost is in this range. So metastatic carcinoma of prostate, metastatic neuroendocrine tumors, both these have promising results using peptide receptor radionuclide therapy. You all are quite familiar with how radioactive iodine is used in metastatic carcinoma of thyroid. I don't need to tell you because in the past also, in previous meetings also, I have covered this extensively, that when you have iodine localizing lesions in the lungs, in the skeleton, in the patient with known carcinoma of thyroid, you don't need a histologic confirmation. You know that this is metastatic carcinoma of thyroid, either follicular variant or papillary or anaplastic. And if it's concentrating iodine, then you administer this with high-dose radio iodine therapy. There is another form of treatment in nuclear medicine. It is called as radiation cyanidectomy. That's reserved for patients who have intractable recurrent hemarthrosis because of hemophilia, or polyarticular inflammatory arthritis because of rheumatoid arthritis or psoriatic arthritis. So here we administer isotopes which are by the name of yttrium, rhenium or erbium, or now we have phosphorus 32 coming from BRC, and also yttrium coming from BRC, where we administer it under imaging guidance in various joints, and it results in substantial reduction in cost towards factor VIII administration in these, suffering children with hemophilia. So these are various aspects of therapy in nuclear medicine that we practice.
Thank you, sir. So there is one question from Dr. Sunil Patil, sir, that if there is a patient with medium-sized malignancy and multiple small lesions seen in lungs on PET with recent history of COVID, how do you interpret?
What size malignancy you said?
Medium size. Medium size malignancy is not specified the primary as such, but multiple small lesion in the lungs on PET.
Are always matter. Remember that. Lung nodule is more likely. This is how you try to dissect between the two, though there are always gray zones as in every field of medicine.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Sharad Desai, sir. Dr. Kanse, sir, has a question.
Just
Sir, you
I want to
have-
ask.
Yeah.
Hello,
Yes, sir.
am I
Yes, sir.
audible?
Yes, sir.
Just I want to ask: is there any role of nuclear scanning in cases of chronic abdominal pain? And ultrasound, we see the thickened momentum, lymph nodes here and there enlarged, and query Cox query lymphoma. When this query lymphoma comes in the radiological investigations, even in CT also, how does this nuclear scanning will help, particularly differentiating whether it is Cox or lymphoma?
Well, so as I at the onset, it's a 4-deoxyglucose is a non-specific isotope. It localizes in proportion to the metabolism of the given pathology. So the tubercular lymph node can be equally hypermetabolic as a lymphomatous node is. But there are subtle features which differentiate the two. One of them is involvement of spleen, which is very unusual and almost unheard of in tuberculosis. You will have diffuse splenic involvement in lymphoma. That's one. Bone marrow involvement is another area where we have to suspect lymphoma. If you have omental nodularity and ascites, I will suspect tuberculosis rather than lymphoma. If you have, these are sort of inflammatory pathologies which no, ascites is very extremely rare in lymphoma. You don't get, such omental, you get nodules, but those are pretty brilliant, well-defined masses in abdomen. But unlike those typical inflammatory, stranding that you see in tuberculosis. So these are various ways of, subtle ways of, trying to differentiate the two. Though if you have a solitary lymph node in abdomen, if you ask me if there's a single 3 centimeter mass in abdomen, whether I can differentiate between tuberculosis and lymphoma, the answer is no. You have to take a biopsy. As simple.
But bone marrow involvement in lymphoma can be diagnosed with nuclear.
Yes, oh yes.
Yes.
But there's a caveat here, there's a rider here, sir. Bone marrow deposit in lymphoma are involved as quite typical. I mean, are not only suggestive, they are confirmatory of involvement. Stage 4 lymphoma. You can say with confidence that the bone marrow is involved. However, the reverse is not true. If we have seen patients with false negative bone marrow on lymphoma, you have lymph nodes here and there, you have splenic involvement, bone marrow looks normal, almost normal. I mean, somebody who knows the bone marrow lesion of pathology may try to act smart, saying, "Nah, this is involved." But if it's, if it doesn't show any local focal hotspots, you can't say it is involved. And in such, you may have false negative. And there is another catch. In lymphoma, there are certain type of lymphomas. For instance, moltomas. What is the extent of metabolic activity before starting the treatment? Because if you have this marginal zone lymphoma, for instance, or a follicular lymphoma to begin with, you know the diagnosis, and you've not done a PET scan. You subject the patient to 6 cycles of chemotherapy, and you send the patient to me for a PET scan. I have a lymph node which is 2 centimeters, and it has an SUV of 1.2. There is no way I can tell you whether this is residual disease or this is treatment response. A 2 centimeter node, which was earlier 4 centimeters, and an SUV of 25 is now in an SUV of 2, and a size from 4 centimeters. I will call it complete treatment response. But at onset, if you tell me this is the first scan and 2 centimeters with an SUV of 1.2, I have no way to tell you what this is. So this is why it's important to have a. I have a conflicting opinion within my own specialists in one important situation. That is, you have a staging scan, you have an interim scan, which is after 3 cycles of chemotherapy. And if the interim scan shows complete metabolic response, what is the need to do a completion scan after 6 cycles? This is what I argue, although I have proven myself wrong at least on 4 occasions, and majority of the times these patients were immunocompromised. So you have complete treatment response at in the interim scan, completion scan, you find the disease has progressed, which is, yes. So this happens rarely. This happens very rarely, but it does happen. And that's why the guidelines say that you have to have the staging scan, the interim scan, and because in the interim scan, if the treatment is not responding, if the disease is not responding, it's futile to continue with the expensive treatment. You have to change the line of treatment. So that's why the interim scan and completion scan, to make sure that the disease is not aggressive and is not relapsed. And I have seen this happen.
I think I would just say that lymphoma basically is more of a medical disorder.
Yes.
I think it can more of rather than imaging, more invasive imaging like bone marrows and all that will be giving better information. And PET scans and all that are more of theoretical exercises. We routinely don't do PET scans to evaluate lymphomas and the bone backgrounds and all that.
Dr. Desai, not surgeons may not be doing it. Lymphoma PET scan is the lymphoma is the first indication of PET scan, FDG PET scan. Please, for God's sake, do not take this message for postgraduates. If you ask anyone in nuclear medicine, what is the first indication of PET scan in any disorder? The top on the list is lymphoma.
No, I was saying for bone marrow. For bone marrow.
No. For staging of lymphoma.
For staging, of course, because basically, because radiation is now so getting involved in the treatment of lymphoma, and it is not chemotherapy alone. So definitely, evaluation of this lymphoma is will be having PET scan. But for evaluating the bone marrow,
that's right. You
are not going to do a PET scan.
You cannot do without the bone marrow. I agree with you, Dr. Desai. 100% I agree. But what I was trying to say is, if there is an objective evidence of bone marrow involvement on a PET scan, there's a possibility you may land up with a false negative bone marrow also, if you have not chosen the correct site. There is a possibility, and we have seen this cases. So it's both ways. But you cannot, if a PET scan is negative, you cannot do away with bone scan. You have to do a bone marrow, You have to do a bone marrow examination. I agree with that.
Yeah, bone marrow is the basis. I mean, let us say.
Absolutely indicated. Absolutely.
Okay. I think, see, PET scans more or less are nowadays very much indicated in most of the surgical undertakings. We surgeons, cancer surgery is becoming more and more aggressive all over the world. I think there is a very thin line between aggressive surgeries and safe surgeries. So more information as given by PET scan prevents us doing unnecessary aggressive surgeries. So definitely in the years to come and in the future, PET scan is going to be one of the most basic investigations for most solid cancers, especially those requiring aggressive therapies. Aggressive therapy, I mean any kind of aggressive therapy, chemotherapy, surgery, or radiation oncology. So if there are no questions, shall we call it a day, Basraj?
Yes, sir. There is a question from Dr. Raj Lakshmi. She has joined. So, ma'am, could you please go ahead?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm actually more interested in the FAPI scans and regarding the uptake, the physiological uptake in the FAPI scans, and how can we differentiate from the pathological uptake?
Okay, so Dr. Rajbakshi is like this. FAPI actually, if you look at the MIP image of a FAPI scan, the uterus may show physiologic uptake, which is diffuse homogeneous. The pancreas may show low-grade diffuse homogeneous uptake. That's about it. Anything outside this, unless there is a pathology. For instance, yesterday we had a case with a beautiful localization of a FAPI in a soft tissue within the renal pelvis, which was hugely ballooned out because of obstruction, and the opposite kidney had hydroureteronecrosis because of a tiny calculus at the distal end. So kidney uptake normally is not seen at all. If there is an obstruction, you may get some degree of physiologic uptake, but otherwise, so that's the beauty of FAPI, that you have virtually a clean MIP image except for pancreas and the uterus, and anything outside that, occasionally you may have some small degree of uptake in the sigmoid column. Otherwise, it's really a clean scan. Physiologically, just these two organs show low grade uptake.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. I think Dr. Davi sir was there, but I couldn't see him, so he must have left. So should we conclude, sir?
One last question, can I ask?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
you.
yes, no problem.
Just I want to know again, what is the role of this nuclear scanning in cystic neoplasms of pancreas?
Well,
Because this is another diagnostic dilemma,
Yes,
whether the
sir.
cyst is having mucinous or adeno element inside, and whether to go for conservative observation plan or go for nuclear scanning.
So, as all cystic lesions and mucin-rich neoplasms can be falsely negative, so now we have a new FLAPI physiologically localizes in the pancreas. So that's a catch there. So we started doing fusion PET MR for the last 2 years now. Whenever we are in doubt. For instance, today we had a case of a carcinoma of lower end of esophagus, who had completed chemotherapy, completed radiotherapy, and we did a PET scan. There was a low grade uptake in the distal esophagus, and because it was just showing, in sort of borderline uptake, we added an MR finding to it. So MRI said that there was restricted diffusion, although I was myself not very convinced about it. So I said there is no convincing evidence of a residual disease. The treatment response is good and a follow-up is suggested. And cystic pancreatic, interrupted cystic pancreatic neoplasm are a challenge to diagnose. Other than that, adenocarcinoma of pancreas are relatively pretty hot on PET scan, and they concentrate FDG very well. So the one way to differentiate between an inflammatory pathology and a malignant mass is relatively easy. Inflammatory usually involves diffuse head, neck, body, and tail of pancreas. Whereas a neoplastic pathology, especially when it is an adenocarcinoma, will show nice focal intense uptake. Where you can get false negative, I already narrated that insulinomas, gastrinomas, and neuroendocrine tumors will be falsely negative on FDG, and you need to use molecules such as somatostatin receptor or GLP-1 scan for insulinoma. And so as far as the mucinous intraductal papillary cyst adenocarcinoma of pancreas is concerned, if there is a focal intense uptake within, you are lucky that it's there. But absence, you need to add on MRI and your clinical skills too, and of course tumor marker. If 19C and 19-9 is high, you are dealing with a malignancy.
One more question I would like to ask.
Sorry, sir?
In carcinoma of breast.
Oh yes, carcinoma of breast.
At what stage you will suggest that we should go for nuclear scanning? Because after PET scan, I have seen the staging has changed.
Yes, of course.
But if you ask in conferences and in CMEs, surgeons are not that in favor of asking for PET scans. These oncosurgeons. So at what stage you will suggest us, okay, you must have PET scan and then only you go for chemo or...
It's like this. When myocardial perfusion study was introduced as an objective way to look for ischemia, cardiologists were not happy. You have an angiogram which shows 80% lesion. You have a thallium scan which is normal. It completely avoids an angioplasty. It's as simple as that. In the United States, unless you have objective evidence of ischemia on myocardial perfusion study, insurance people will not reimburse your angioplasty costs. Insurance people will not reimburse your CABG costs. So that's the evidence. They do 6 million 60 lakh myocardial perfusion study अमेरिकेमध्ये प्रत्येक वर्षी होतात. आपल्याकडे पूर्ण भारतामध्ये मिळून जर 6,000 जरी होत असतील तर मिळवला आपण. Because it's I'm sorry to say this, but if you have a single hotspot in the, we had 3 days back a CA breast, tiny breast lesion, everything else was normal. There was a sacral metastasis. So it completely changes the line of management. You have, that's why.
So then at what stage we should go for nuclear scanning?
All aggressive,
Before surgery or after surgery, before starting chemotherapy?
Staging, always.
Always staging.
Always.
I
Staging.
think Dr. Kamse, there are clear guidelines in breast cancer. The guidelines are for stage 1 and 2. You don't require to do any PET scanning. PET scanning is important mostly in stage 3, and that too more or less in for node positive disease or something of that sort.
I agree.
In the NCCN guidelines, PET scan is not compulsory.
Yeah, that's what
PET scan
guidelines do say. I agree with you, but practical experience, if you look at, I think it needs serious.
No. See, anecdotal incidents will be there, but we don't go on anecdotal incidents. All the data.
It needs serious work. I think we need to work on this seriously. I agree with you. The guidelines, what you say is correct.
Okay.
So that was a very fruitful discussion, and with the constraint of time, I think we need to stop today. I sincerely thank Dr. Solo sir for taking time out of your busy schedule and making it a point to deliver the lecture out here. It was a wonderful presentation, and it was a very fruitful discussion. I also thank Dr. Dalvi sir, who was there, who made it a point to attend for some time. I can see Dr. Jain sir being there, so thank you, Jain sir, for attending. Thank you, Dr. Kassa sir, Dr. Varute sir, Dr. Sharad Desai sir. I also thank today's observer, Dr. Chowgule sir, and moderators for today. Thank you, delegates, and stay tuned for next session on next Saturday at 8 o'clock. See you. Good night.
Good night.